Ryan Walker, a 38-year-old wildlife photographer from Montana, decided to spend the weekend hiking in the Bitterroot Mountains after months of exhausting work. His only companion was Max, a 6-year-old German shepherd who had accompanied him on countless adventures. That morning, the Montana sky was crystal clear, with barely a cloud in sight. Ryan parked his pickup truck at the trailhead and grabbed his backpack. Max jumped out first, wagging his tail excitedly. "Another mountain trip, old buddy." Max barked once, as if he understood every word. The trail wound through towering pine forests. Ryan frequently stopped to photograph elk eagles and crystal-clear streams. By noon, they reached a breathtaking overlook. The entire Montana Valley stretched beneath them like a painting. Ryan became absorbed in capturing photos, but Max stood still, staring toward the horizon. Dark clouds were slowly gathering behind the distant mountain peaks. Max didn't like it. He remained motionless for a long moment. Ryan laughed. "Don't worry, the weather looks perfect." Yet Max kept watching the clouds. A storm was coming. And neither of them knew that this trip was about to change their lives forever. By late afternoon, Ryan and Max had reached an area near the mountain summit. The air was much colder up there. Strong winds swept continuously across the rocky slopes. Ryan checked his watch. He had hiked longer than expected. The descent would take at least 4 more hours. Looking at the orange and crimson colors spreading across the horizon, Ryan decided to spend the night on the mountain. He found a flat clearing surrounded by old pine trees. It was the perfect place to set up camp. Max immediately began circling the area. He sniffed every bush, every rock, every tree trunk. It was his routine. Ryan always felt safer when Max was around. While Ryan pitched the tent, Max continued patrolling. The last rays of sunlight disappeared behind distant peaks. The temperature dropped quickly. Ryan built a small campfire. Orange flames danced against the approaching darkness. The smell of hot coffee drifted through the cold mountain air. Ryan sat on a fallen log and admired the view. From that elevation, he could see miles and miles of wilderness stretching into the distance. That was why he loved his work, and why he loved traveling with Max. "We've been doing this together for almost 6 years now," Ryan smiled. Max lay beside the fire. His ears remained alert. He looked at Ryan, then rested his head on Ryan's leg. Ryan gently scratched behind his ears. "You're the best friend I've ever had." The wind began to strengthen. Tall pine trees swayed heavily. Ryan looked up at the sky. The clouds he had noticed earlier were much closer now. Thicker, darker, more numerous. But the weather forecast had promised clear conditions all weekend. Ryan wasn't too worried. He continued preparing dinner, a little beef jerky, some bread, and hot water. Max received several pieces of dried beef as a reward. The dog happily chewed beside the fire. Night slowly settled over the mountain. A sky full of stars appeared above the peaks. Ryan grabbed his camera and took several photographs. Everything looked perfect. If conditions remained this way, tomorrow morning would provide hundreds of incredible photos. Around 9 o'clock that night, Ryan crawled into the tent. Max followed him inside. Outside, the wind continued to grow stronger. The sound of pine branches rustling echoed through the forest. Ryan zipped up his sleeping bag. He closed his eyes. But Max did not sleep. He sat near the tent entrance. His eyes remained fixed on the darkness outside. Every few minutes, he lifted his head and listened, as if he sensed something. Around midnight, a distant rumble of thunder woke Ryan. He opened his eyes. A flash of lightning illuminated the tent walls. Max immediately stood up. He moved closer to Ryan. Ryan checked the time. 7 p.m. A storm was forming. He sighed. Hopefully, it'll clear up by morning. Max didn't react. He continued staring toward the dark forest. The wind became louder. Tree branches collided with each other, creating strange sounds in the darkness. Ryan tried to go back to sleep, but a feeling of uneasiness slowly settled in his chest. Somewhere beyond the darkness, nature was preparing something. And by morning, everything would change. Ryan woke up before sunrise. The air was so cold that every breath became a cloud of white mist. Outside the tent, the sky remained gloomy. Dark clouds still covered most of the mountain peaks, but the storm from the night before seemed to have moved away. Ryan stepped out of the tent. Max was already awake. He stood on a large rock overlooking the valley below. The wind was still strong, but no longer threatening. Ryan lit a small fire one last time. He brewed a cup of hot coffee. Meanwhile, Max checked the surrounding area. After a simple breakfast, Ryan packed up camp. He wanted to get off the mountain before the weather changed again. Around 7 in the morning, the two companions continued their journey. The descent was much narrower than the trail they had climbed. One side was a steep cliff, the other dropped sharply into the wilderness below. Ryan walked carefully. Max stayed a few meters ahead, occasionally turning back to check on him. About an hour later, they reached a famous section of the trail. Hikers called it Eagle Ridge, a narrow ridgeline stretching hundreds of meters. The scenery was breathtaking. Ryan couldn't resist pulling out his camera. He photographed rocky cliffs, cloud-covered mountains, and rare beams of sunlight breaking through the sky. Max sat nearby, patiently waiting. A powerful gust of wind suddenly swept across the ridge. Ryan grabbed his hat. He laughed. The weather changes fast up here. Max wasn't amused. His ears stood upright. He kept staring down the mountainside. Ryan continued forward. The trail became even narrower. Some sections were barely half a meter wide, but he remained confident. He had climbed mountains dozens of times. Terrain like this wasn't unfamiliar. Yet nature always finds a way to surprise people. Near the middle of the ridge, Ryan spotted an incredible photo opportunity. A mist-covered mountain range appeared in the distance. He stopped, stepped onto a rocky outcrop, raised his camera, and snapped several photographs. Then he heard a faint crack beneath his feet. Ryan froze. He looked down. A loose rock was shifting. Everything happened too quickly. The ledge suddenly collapsed. Ryan lost his balance. His body lunged toward the edge. Max's terrified barking echoed across the mountain. Ryan tried to grab a small tree. He missed and slipped over the side. He tumbled down the steep slope. Bushes snapped around him. Loose rocks rolled everywhere. Ryan rolled again and again. His body slammed into dirt and stone. His camera struck a large boulder and shattered. Finally, he crashed into an old pine tree growing from the mountainside. Everything stopped. Ryan lay motionless, his head spinning. He slowly opened his eyes. The world was blurry. The sound of wind, rustling leaves, and then a familiar bark. Max. The dog was desperately trying to reach him. Ryan wanted to call his name, but he didn't have the strength. A sharp wave of pain shot through his left leg. He looked down. The leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. His heart sank. He understood immediately. He was seriously injured and trapped in the middle of the wilderness. No phone signal, no passing hikers. No one knew exactly where he was, except for one loyal friend, Max. For the first few minutes after the fall, Ryan could barely think. The pain in his left leg made his entire body shake. He forced himself to take deep breaths, trying to stay calm. Max finally found a way down to him. The dog rushed forward, licking Ryan's face repeatedly. His eyes filled with concern. "I'm okay," Ryan lied. He knew he wasn't okay at all, but he didn't want Max to panic. Ryan tried to sit up. A sharp pain instantly shot through his leg. He collapsed back against the ground. Sweat appeared on his forehead despite the cold air. Max sat beside him, refusing to move away. Ryan pulled out his phone. The screen still worked, but the words he feared most appeared at the top. No signal. No service. He dragged himself a few feet. Still nothing. The battery was at 40%. Not much. Ryan knew he had to conserve it. He turned the screen off, then looked around. The situation was worse than he had realized. He was trapped on a narrow ledge. Above him stood a steep, rocky wall. Below him stretched hundreds of feet of wilderness. with his injured leg. He couldn't climb up, and he couldn't climb down. Ryan looked toward the sky. The dark clouds had returned, faster than expected. The wind began growing stronger. Max noticed it too. He kept staring toward the horizon. A thunderclap echoed across the mountains. This one was much closer. Ryan cursed under his breath. If the storm truly arrived, things would become extremely dangerous. Mountain temperatures could drop rapidly. He needed shelter. The only option was a rocky overhang several meters away. Ryan began dragging himself across the ground. Every movement felt unbearable. Max stayed beside him, occasionally pressing against him for support. Nearly 20 minutes later, Ryan finally reached the overhang. It wasn't large, but it blocked part of the wind. He leaned against the rock wall, exhausted. The first drops of rain began falling. A few at first, then dozens. Then a cold curtain of rain swept across the mountainside. Max immediately curled up beside Ryan. His thick coat quickly became soaked, but he refused to move. Ryan pulled his jacket tighter, trying to preserve body heat. The rain continued for hours. The sky darkened. Even though it was still early afternoon, the wilderness became more intimidating by the minute. Occasionally, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the entire valley for a few brief seconds. Ryan began feeling cold, very cold. He knew that was dangerous. If the temperature dropped much further, hypothermia could become a serious threat. Max seemed to understand. He moved even closer, pressing his body against Ryan, sharing his warmth. Ryan placed a hand on Max's neck. "Thanks, old buddy." Max let out a soft whine, as if telling him everything would be okay, but Ryan wasn't sure. Night was coming. His phone battery had dropped to 30%. No signal. No one knew where he was. No one was coming today. That realization frightened him. For the first time since he had started hiking, Ryan truly wondered if he might never make it home. He looked at Max. The dog remained beside him, not leaving, not panicking, not giving up. And in that moment, Ryan realized something. If he still had hope, that hope was Max. The first night on the mountain felt like the longest night of Ryan's life. The rain never stopped. Wind howled through the rocky gaps. The temperature dropped close to freezing. Ryan fought to stay awake, but his body grew weaker by the hour. His injured leg had swollen badly. Every movement felt like a knife cutting through him. Max remained beside him for hours. The dog barely slept. Every few minutes, he lifted his head, listening, watching the darkness, scenting the air. Ryan checked his phone. Nearly 2 in the morning. The battery had dropped to 25%. He turned it on once more. No signal. Only the same words. No signal. Ryan shut it off. He couldn't afford to waste any more battery. Outside, the storm continued. Thunder echoed across the mountain peaks. Lightning flashed repeatedly. Each flash illuminated the surrounding cliffs for a brief moment. A cold world. A lonely world. A completely isolated world. Near dawn, Ryan began drifting in and out of consciousness. Time no longer felt real. He wasn't sure whether he was awake or asleep. Everything became blurred. But one thing never changed. Max was still there. When the first light appeared on the horizon, the rain finally weakened. Ryan opened his eyes. His entire body felt frozen. His lips were pale. He tried to sit up. He couldn't. Max immediately stood, his eyes filled with concern. Ryan gently stroked the dog's head. "Listen," his voice was weak. "If you stay here, we're both in trouble." Max tilted his head. Ryan forced a sad smile. "I need help. I need someone to find me." Max continued staring at him. Ryan didn't know if the dog understood, but he kept talking. "Go down the mountain. Find somebody. Just go." The words hurt him. He had never wanted to be separated from Max, especially not now, but he knew this might be their only chance. Max didn't move. He simply stared at him. 1 minute, 2 minutes, then slowly stepped backward. Ryan felt his throat tighten. Max walked a few yards away, then turned around. Ryan nodded. Go. Don't worry about me. Max remained still for a few more seconds, then turned and ran down the mountain. Ryan watched until the dog disappeared among the pine trees. For the first time since the accident, he was truly alone. No footsteps, no warm body beside him, no loyal companion. Ryan leaned his head against the rock wall and closed his eyes. He didn't know whether he had made the right decision. He didn't know whether Max would find anyone. He didn't know whether he could survive long enough to wait, but deep inside, he still believed if anyone in the world could save him, it was Max. Meanwhile, miles away, Max raced through muddy mountain trails, no longer running like a dog on a hike, but running like his owner's life depended on every second, because it did. Max had never run this fast before. The trail that had taken Ryan and him hours to climb the day before was now disappearing beneath his paws. He raced downhill at full speed. Mud sprayed behind him. Branches scraped against his black and tan coat. But he never slowed down. Only one thought drove him forward. Find people. Find help. The rain had weakened, but the forest remained soaked. Many sections of the trail were slippery. At one point, Max slipped down a small slope, but immediately got back up and kept running. Time was passing, and Ryan was alone on the mountain. More than an hour later, Max reached the area near the trailhead parking lot. It was nearly empty. Only a handful of vehicles remained. No one stood outside. Max ran around, sniffing, searching, looking for help. A couple of tourists noticed him, but they assumed he was simply a dog wandering around. Max barked loudly, again and again, then ran a few steps, turned back, and barked once more. But they didn't understand. Eventually, they climbed into their vehicle and drove away. Max watched them leave. More precious time lost. The dog began running toward the ranger station near the entrance of the wilderness area. Ryan had visited it before previous hikes. Perhaps Max remembered. Perhaps it was instinct. Either way, he kept running. Near noon, Max arrived at the small wooden ranger station. Inside, Ranger Ethan Brooks was finishing paperwork. He heard barking outside. At first, he ignored it. Tourists often brought dogs to the area, but the barking continued. More urgent, more desperate. Ethan stepped outside and saw Max. His coat was soaked. His paws were covered in mud. His breathing was heavy. What caught Ethan's attention most was the collar. There was an identification tag and an emergency contact number. Max ran toward him, grabbed the leg of Ethan's pants gently, then ran a few yards away, turned around, and barked. Ethan frowned. "Hey, buddy, what's wrong?" Max repeated the behavior. "Run, turn around, bark, run, turn around." This time, Ethan felt something wasn't right. Years of experience had taught him that animals often sensed danger before humans, and this dog was clearly trying to communicate something. Ethan pulled out his phone and called the number on the tag. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. At that moment, another ranger stepped outside. "What's going on?" Ethan pointed toward Max. "I think this dog is trying to get help." The other ranger laughed at first, then looked closer. Max didn't look like a lost dog. He looked exhausted, worried, and he kept staring toward the mountains. Ethan knelt in front of him. "Is your owner up there immediately?" Max barked loudly. His tail wagged hard. Then he turned toward the trail. Ethan and the other ranger exchanged glances. Their smiles disappeared. Something had happened, and this dog might be the only clue. Ethan Brooks stood up immediately. Years of experience as a ranger had taught him never to ignore unusual behavior, especially from a dog desperately trying to get help. Max continued barking, then ran a few yards toward the trail, before turning back, looking at Ethan, waiting, as if saying, "Follow me." Ethan looked at his colleague. "I think someone is in trouble." His partner nodded. "I think so too." Only minutes later, 2 ranger vehicles left the station. Max ran ahead, leading the way. While Ethan continuously communicated through his radio, a small search team was quickly assembled. However, the Bitterroot Mountains covered an enormous area. Without knowing the exact location, finding a single person in hundreds of square miles of wilderness was nearly impossible. At that moment, all hope rested on Max. About an hour later, the search team reached the campsite Ryan had used the night before. Max immediately ran toward it, sniffing around the cold fire pit. The tent was still there, but Ryan was gone. Ethan knelt down to inspect the area. Footprints, camping equipment, signs of recent activity. "This is definitely his campsite," one ranger said. Max kept moving, this time faster, heading directly toward Eagle Ridge. The search team followed. The trail became increasingly difficult. The wind strengthened once again. Dark clouds continued gathering overhead. Ethan looked up at the sky. He didn't like what he saw. If another storm arrived, the search would become much more dangerous. By early afternoon, Max suddenly stopped. He stood beside a rocky cliff, barking repeatedly. Ethan approached and immediately spotted something. A camera, shattered, lying among the rocks. He picked it up. The strap was still attached. Printed on it were the words Ryan Walker. Everyone exchanged glances. No one doubted it anymore. An accident had happened. Max continued barking, louder, more urgently. He ran to the edge of the slope, then stared downward. Ethan carefully moved closer, looking over the side. Broken bushes, displaced rocks, a visible path leading down the mountainside. Clear signs of a fall. "My God," one ranger whispered. Ethan immediately grabbed his radio. "We found evidence. The victim likely fell down the slope." The response came instantly. A professional rescue team was dispatched. A rescue helicopter began preparing for takeoff. But the biggest problem remained. No one knew exactly where Ryan was. No one, except Max. The dog stared down the mountainside. Then, without hesitation, he started racing downhill, so quickly that Ethan shouted after him, "Max, wait." But Max didn't stop, because he knew Ryan was still out there, and waiting for him to come back. As Max raced down the mountainside, Ethan and the ranger team had no choice but to follow. But none of them could keep up with him. Max leaped over rocks, slipped through bushes, and moved across the rugged terrain as if he knew every inch of it. Meanwhile, Ryan remained leaning against the rocky overhang. He had lost track of time. The cold had numbed his entire body. His eyelids felt heavy. Several times he nearly drifted to sleep, but each time he forced himself awake. He knew falling asleep in his condition could be dangerous. His phone battery was down to 15%. Ryan turned it on one more time, just to check. No signal. He gave a bitter laugh. "At least I tried." Ryan looked toward the sky. Dark clouds continued gathering overhead. A freezing wind swept across the mountainside. He pulled his jacket tighter, but it barely helped anymore. Then, he heard something. At first, it was faint, very far away. Ryan frowned, listening carefully. Then he heard it again, a bark. Ryan's eyes widened. "Max," he tried to call out, but his voice was weak. The barking came again, closer this time. His heart started racing. Max had returned. A few minutes later, a familiar black and tan shape appeared through the bushes. Max. The dog rushed toward him, licking his face repeatedly, his tail wagging furiously. Ryan laughed. For the first time in nearly 2 days, he truly felt hope. "Welcome back, buddy." Max barked loudly, then turned his head uphill. Ryan didn't understand at first, but then he heard something else. Human voices, distant but unmistakable. Ryan Walker." The calls echoed across the mountainside. Ryan could hardly believe it. The search team. They were here. Max continued barking. Again and again, guiding them. Ethan was the first person to spot Ryan. From above, he shouted into his radio, "We found him." Relief spread through the rescue team. For hours, they had feared they were too late. Ryan looked upward. Faces appeared along the slope. Rescue ropes began descending toward him. At that moment, Ryan finally allowed himself to breathe. He had survived. But the mission wasn't over yet. Another storm was approaching, and they needed to get him off the mountain before it was too late. The moment Ryan was found, the rescue team immediately got to work. But nobody celebrated. Experienced rescuers understood something important. Finding the victim was only half the mission. Getting him off the mountain was the hard part. Ethan carefully climbed down to Ryan's position. Another rescuer followed. They quickly assessed his condition. Ryan was conscious, but weak. His body temperature had dropped significantly. His left leg was badly injured. He was dehydrated, exhausted, and had been exposed to the elements for far too long. "We're getting you out of here," Ethan said. Ryan nodded weakly. His eyes shifted toward Max. The dog remained beside him, refusing to leave. One rescuer smiled. "I think he's the real leader of today's rescue team." Ryan managed a small laugh. "Without him, you'd never have found me." Everyone knew that was true. While the team stabilized Ryan's leg, thunder rolled across the mountains again. This time, much closer. Ethan looked up. Dark clouds were racing toward them. A second storm was approaching. He grabbed his radio. "We need the helicopter now." The reply came immediately. "It's on the way." About 15 minutes out. 15 minutes. It didn't sound long. But in the mountains, 15 minutes could change everything. The first powerful gusts of wind arrived. Stronger, colder. The rescue team worked as quickly as possible. Ryan was secured into a rescue litter. Every strap was checked twice. Max never left his side. Even as the rescuers moved around, the dog stayed close, as if he feared Ryan might disappear again. A few minutes later, a familiar sound echoed through the valley. Helicopter blades. Everyone looked up. Through the gray clouds, a rescue helicopter appeared. Ryan had never been happier to hear that sound. The aircraft attempted to approach, but the winds were stronger than expected. The helicopter shook constantly. The pilot had to circle several times, searching for a safe position. Below, the rescuers watched anxiously. If the helicopter couldn't perform the extraction, they would have to carry Ryan down the mountain. That could take hours, and the weather was getting worse. Finally, the pilot found a workable approach. A rescue specialist was lowered down. The extraction cable was deployed. Ryan was secured to the hoist system. Everything moved slowly, carefully. Nobody wanted to make a mistake. Max stood nearby. His eyes locked on Ryan. When Ryan finally began rising toward the helicopter, he looked down. Max was still there, watching him. Ryan raised a hand. "Let's go home, old buddy." Max barked loudly. The sound echoed across the mountains. At that exact moment, the first drops of the new storm began to fall. But this time, Ryan knew he was going to survive, because Max never gave up. When Ryan woke up again, he heard the steady sound of machines nearby. Everything around him was white. White ceiling, white walls, white lights. For the first few seconds, he couldn't remember where he was. Then the memories returned. The mountain, the fall, the storm, Max. Ryan immediately turned his head. A sharp ache ran through his body, but he didn't care. The first thing he wanted to know was where Max was. The hospital room door opened. A nurse stepped inside. "Good morning." Ryan's voice was hoarse. "Where's Max?" The nurse laughed. "You might be the first patient I've ever had who asked about his dog before asking about himself." Ryan managed a weak smile. "Is he okay? More than okay?" she replied. "Actually, he's becoming the most popular visitor in the building." Ryan exhaled deeply. Relief flooded through him. A few minutes later, the door opened again. This time, a familiar figure appeared. Max. The dog stood in the doorway. His ears perked, his eyes bright. It took only a second. Max realized Ryan was awake. He rushed forward, his tail wagging so hard it was almost out of control. Ryan laughed, his first real laugh since the accident. Max placed his front paws against the side of the bed, licking Ryan's hand repeatedly. "You did it," Ryan whispered. "I knew you would." Max let out a happy whine, as if everything was finally okay. Over the next several days, Ryan slowly recovered. His leg wasn't permanently damaged, but it would take months to heal completely. That didn't bother Ryan. He was alive, and that was what mattered most. Every day, Max came to visit, lying beside the hospital bed, napping, or simply watching Ryan. The doctors eventually became used to it. One doctor joked, "I think this dog works harder than the rest of us." Ryan laughed. Maybe that was true. A week later, Ryan was discharged. That morning, the Montana sky was clear and blue, just like the day he had started the hike. Max sat in the pickup truck. In his usual spot by the window, Ryan walked more slowly than before. But he walked. He opened the truck door. Max immediately moved over to make room. Ryan sat behind the wheel, silent for a moment, then looked at his best friend. "Thank you." Max tilted his head. Ryan smiled. He knew the dog would never fully understand those words, but it didn't matter, because between them, words weren't necessary. Several months later, spring returned to Montana. Snow began melting from the mountain peaks. The forests turned green again. One morning, Ryan drove back to the Bitterroot Mountains. The same mountain, the same place where everything had happened. He stepped out of the truck. Max walked beside him. Together they stood looking at the trail. Neither of them spoke. A gentle breeze moved through the pine trees. The wilderness felt peaceful. Ryan knelt down, resting a hand on Max's head. "We're not finished yet." Max wagged his tail. Ryan smiled. This time, they didn't climb to the summit. They weren't trying to conquer anything or prove anything. They simply walked together along the familiar trail. Slowly, peacefully. Because after everything, the most valuable thing wasn't the mountain. It was the friend who had helped him survive it. Ryan kept walking. Max stayed beside him. Their shadows stretched across the spring sunlight and slowly disappeared among the pine trees. Some heroes appear in newspapers. Some heroes become known around the world. But some heroes never realize they saved a life. Max was one of those heroes. He never knew how far he ran through the storm. He never knew how many miles he guided rescuers across the mountains. He never knew that without him, Ryan might never have made it home. To Max, it was simple. His friend needed help, and he refused to give up. Sometimes loyalty doesn't need promises. It doesn't need speeches, and it doesn't need medals. It is shown through actions. Every step taken, every hour spent waiting, and every moment spent refusing to quit. Ryan had climbed many mountains throughout his life, but on that mountain he learned something more valuable than any photograph he had ever taken. The most important part of any journey is not the destination. It's the one who walks beside you when the road becomes difficult, when hope seems lost, and when you need a friend more than anything else. For Ryan, that friend had 4 legs, a black and tan coat, and the name Max